Some truths don't disappear. They wait until the right person carries them back. Donald Riley had spent years making sure his past stayed where it belonged, quiet, distant, unfinished. So when a girl named Miriam Nicholson stood in front of him on a rain-soaked night, calm and unafraid, he assumed this would be brief. She wasn't asking for help. She wasn't asking for money. She only mentioned her mother, Fatima Nicholson, a woman who once worked in his home 10 years ago, back when Donald believed every chapter of his life could be closed and archived. Miriam spoke carefully, like someone who had practiced a moment. Then she reached into her coat. Most people think the truth comes with explanations. It doesn't. It comes with an object and a silence that tells you everything has already changed. Before we continue, please like, share, and subscribe, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Now let's dive back into the story. The rain had finally stopped, but the streets still shimmered under the glow of the streetlights. Donald Riley stood outside the glass doors of his Manhattan office building, watching his driver pull around. That's when he noticed her, a young girl, no older than 13, standing beneath the awning across the street. She wasn't huddled against the cold or looking around nervously like most kids her age would. She simply stood there, hands in her jacket pockets, eyes fixed directly on him. Donald frowned. It was nearly 11 at night. No child should be out here alone. He crossed the street, his Italian loafers clicking against the wet pavement. As he approached, she didn't flinch, didn't step back. Most people, adults included, shifted uncomfortably under his gaze. But not her. "Are you waiting for someone?" Donald asked, keeping his voice measured. The girl tilted her head slightly, studying him with an unsettling calm. "No," she said evenly. "I already found who I came for." Donald's jaw tightened. Most people would assume this is where the story becomes simple, a lost child, a kind gesture, resolution. That assumption is why what comes next is usually missed. He glanced around, looking for a parent, a guardian, anyone. The street was empty except for the distant hum of traffic. "Where are your parents? Do you need me to call someone?" "I don't need anything from you, Mr. Riley," she said, her voice steady, almost rehearsed. His pulse quickened. She knew his name. He took a half step closer, lowering his voice. "Who are you?" For the first time, something flickered in her expression. Not fear, not anger, but something deeper. Recognition, maybe. Or judgment. She reached into her jacket and pulled out something small, clutched tightly in her palm. She didn't show it to him. Not yet. "The prayers of the forgotten don't disappear, Mr. Riley," she said softly, her eyes never leaving his. "They just wait." Donald's breath caught. There was something in her tone, something ancient and unshakable, that made his skin prickle. "Who sent you?" he demanded, his voice sharper now. She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she took one step forward, close enough that he could see the rainwater still clinging to her locks, the exhaustion hidden behind her composure. Then she spoke again, and the words hit him like a punch to the chest. "My mother worked for you." The world seemed to tilt. Donald's mind raced backward, 10 years, faces, names, fragments of a life he'd buried beneath Empire Building and endless deals. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. Miriam Nicholson didn't wait for his response. She turned and walked away, disappearing into the shadows between buildings, leaving Donald Riley standing alone under the streetlight, his heart pounding, his hands trembling. And for the first time in 20 years, the man who controlled everything realized he was no longer in control. Donald didn't sleep that night. He sat in his penthouse office, staring at the city lights sprawled beneath him like scattered diamonds. The girl's words echoed in his mind, looping endlessly. "My mother worked for you." By dawn, he'd convinced himself it was nothing. A coincidence. A scam, perhaps. Some opportunist coaching a child to exploit his guilt. He'd seen it before. People inventing connections, fabricating histories, trying to claw their way into his fortune. But when his assistant buzzed him at 8 sharp, his carefully constructed rationalization crumbled. "Mr. Riley, there's a young girl in the lobby. She says you're expecting her." He wasn't. but he told them to send her up anyway. Miriam entered his office with the same unnerving composure she displayed the night before. No hesitation. No awe at the floor-to-ceiling windows or the mahogany desk that cost more than most cars. She simply walked to the chair across from him and sat down. "You came back," Donald said, folding his hands on the desk. "You need to hear her name," Miriam replied. Donald's throat tightened. "I employ hundreds of people. I don't remember every—" "Fatima," Miriam interrupted. "Fatima Nicholson." The name hit him like a freight train. His expression flickered, just for a second, before he regained control. But it was too late. Miriam had seen it. "I don't remember every employee," Donald said again, but this time his voice was quieter, more careful. The words felt rehearsed, like a script he'd memorized long ago for a moment just like this. This is the point where most people stop listening, because they think they already understand what happened. They assume they know how this story ends. But the truth doesn't live in assumptions. Miriam leaned forward slightly, her eyes locked on his. "She remembered you." Donald's jaw clenched. He wanted to look away, to dismiss her, to press the intercom and have security escort her out. But something in her gaze held him in place, something that felt less like accusation and more like excavation, digging up what he'd buried. "Every seed planted in darkness still grows, Mr. Riley," Miriam said softly. "Even the ones you forgot you buried." His hands trembled slightly. He gripped the edge of the desk to steady them. "What do you want?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Miriam didn't answer immediately. Instead, she reached into her coat pocket, her fingers closing around something small and metallic. She didn't pull it out, not yet. She just held it there, watching his face. "She kept something you gave her," Miriam said quietly. Donald's breath stopped. His mind raced backward again. Fatima, the house. 10 years ago. Fragments of memory surfaced, like debris from a shipwreck. A face. A voice. A moment he convinced himself meant nothing. "I never gave," he started, but the lie died on his lips. Because deep down, Donald Riley knew exactly what she was talking about, and the weight of that knowledge was about to bury him. Donald remembered Fatima the way one remembers background music, present but forgettable, pleasant but unnecessary. She'd been quiet, grateful, temporary. That's what he told himself as he sat alone in his office later that afternoon, staring at the empty chair where Miriam had been. Fatima had worked in his household for less than a year. She'd cleaned, organized, smiled politely when he passed her in the hallways. She'd never complained, never caused trouble, never asked for anything. She never complained, Donald muttered to himself, as if saying it aloud would make it more true. But the memory felt slippery, unreliable, like trying to hold water in his hands. He buzzed his assistant. "Get Eleanor Price on the phone." Eleanor had been his house manager back then, the gatekeeper between him and the staff. If anyone would remember Fatima, it would be her. The call connected after 3 rings. "Donald," Eleanor's crisp voice came through. "To what do I owe the pleasure?" "Fatima Nicholson," he said. "Do you remember her?" There was a pause. Vaguely. Housekeeping staff, wasn't she? Around 2015, 2016. "What do you remember about her?" Another pause, longer this time. Not much. She kept to herself. Victor handled most of the logistics with the staff back then. "Why?" Victor Hale. His driver. His fixer. The man who made problems disappear. Donald ended the call and immediately dialed Victor. "Boss," Victor answered. "Fatima Nicholson. What do you know?" Silence. Then, "That was a long time ago." "I didn't ask when it was. I asked what you know." Victor exhaled slowly. "I stayed out of it, Donald. Whatever happened, I wasn't involved. If you leave here, you'll only know the version he remembers. And memory, when left to powerful men, tends to edit out the inconvenient parts." Donald hung up. His hands were shaking again. He closed his eyes and let the memory come, unedited this time. Fatima, 24, maybe 25. Dark eyes. A quiet strength that he'd mistaken for submission. She'd worked late one evening, organizing files in his study. He'd been drinking. stressed. Marianne had left him that week, the marriage already crumbling under the weight of his ambition. And Fatima had been there. Kind. Present. He'd said something. Done something. The details blurred, conveniently obscured by time and guilt. Quiet isn't consent, Ruth Calder had once told him during a charity event. It's caution. He'd laughed it off then. But now, sitting alone in his empire of glass and steel, the words felt like prophecy. Donald's phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. She kept something you gave her. His chest tightened, because whatever Miriam was about to show him, it wasn't just a locket. It was proof. And proof had a way of destroying carefully constructed lies. Donald stood at the floor-to-ceiling window of his penthouse, phone pressed to his ear, watching the city below move with oblivious rhythm. That house was cleared out, he said firmly, as if saying it with enough conviction would make it true. Eleanor, you supervised the entire transition when I moved to the new estate. Nothing was left behind. Eleanor Price's voice came through measured and professional. I followed protocol, Donald. Staff belongings were inspected. Personal items were returned or disposed of according to the separation agreements. Everything was documented. Everything. Everything that went through official channels, yes. The qualifier hung in the air like smoke. Donald ended the call and immediately dialed Victor. We need to talk, Donald said without preamble, about what happened when Fatima left. Victor's sigh was audible. Donald, I told you. I'm not asking what you remember. I'm asking what existed. Physical evidence. Documents. Belongings. A long pause. Traffic noise filtered through Victor's end of the line. Not everything goes through records, Victor finally admitted. You know that. Some staff, they leave quietly. They take what's theirs and disappear. Eleanor controlled what went through official channels, but she couldn't monitor everything. Donald's grip tightened on the phone. What are you saying? I'm saying that if someone wanted to keep something, a photo, a gift, a letter, they could have, especially if they knew how to move through that house without being seen. This is usually where people click away, when the story gets complicated, when the truth stops being convenient. It's also where the story finally stops protecting him. Donald's mind raced. He'd renovated that estate twice since then, donated furniture, sold artwork, purged anything that reminded him of those years, of Marianne, of the instability, of decisions made in moments he'd rather forget. But objects had a way of surviving their purges, especially objects that meant something to someone else. His phone buzzed. Another text from the unknown number. Tomorrow. Same place. 8 p.m. Donald stared at the message. He could ignore it. He could have his legal team draft a restraining order. He could make this problem disappear the way he'd made countless others vanish into the machinery of his wealth and influence. But he knew he wouldn't. What you bury doesn't die, Mr. Riley. Miriam's voice echoed in his memory. It just waits for resurrection. The next evening, Donald arrived 15 minutes early. The same street corner. The same awning. The rain had returned, lighter this time, misting the air with a cold dampness that seeped through his coat. Miriam appeared at exactly 8 o'clock, stepping out of the shadows with that same unnerving calm. You came, she said. Not a question. A confirmation. Donald nodded, not trusting his voice. They stood in silence for a moment, the city humming around them, cars passing, distant sirens, the electric buzz of neon signs reflecting off wet pavement. Then Miriam reached into her coat pocket. Donald's heart hammered against his ribs. Every instinct screamed at him to walk away, to run, to protect himself from whatever truth was about to emerge from that pocket. But he stood frozen, watching as Miriam's fingers closed around something small. She pulled her hand out slowly, deliberately, and opened her palm. The rain fell harder now, drumming against the awning above them with a rhythm that sounded almost like a countdown. Miriam's hand remained extended, palm up, fingers open. In the center of her palm sat a locket, small, silver, tarnished with age but unmistakable. The intricate filigree pattern along its edges caught the streetlight, casting delicate shadows across her hand. Donald's world stopped. He knew that locket. He'd held it once, years ago, in a jewelry store in Midtown. Custom-made. One of a kind. He commissioned it during a moment of what? Guilt? Affection? Impulse? The memory crashed over him like a wave. My father had this locket, Miriam said quietly, her voice cutting through the rain and the traffic and the thundering in Donald's chest. His mouth opened, but no words came. His body reacted before his mind could catch up. A step backward, his hand reaching for the wall behind him to steady himself, his breath coming in short, shallow gasps. That's impossible, he whispered. But even as he said it, he knew it wasn't, because he was staring at the proof, dangling from a thin chain in the hands of a 13-year-old girl who had her mother's eyes. Most people think this is the reveal, the moment when everything clicks into place. It isn't, because the locket isn't just an object. It's a witness. Miriam took a step closer, her eyes never leaving his face. She told me you gave it to her the night before she left her house. She said you told her it was a thank you for her discretion. Donald's legs felt weak. I didn't. The truth doesn't need your permission to exist, Mr. Riley, Miriam said softly. It just waits for someone brave enough to speak it. The rain soaked through Donald's coat, plastered his hair to his forehead, but he didn't move. He couldn't. He was trapped in this moment, caught between the man he'd convinced himself he was and the man this locket proved he'd been. Where is she? He finally managed. Where's Fatima? Miriam's expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes. Pain, maybe, or resignation. My mother never sold it, she said, ignoring his question. Even when we had nothing. Even when the lights got shut off, and we ate cereal for dinner 3 nights in a row. She never sold it. Donald's chest constricted. Why? Because it wasn't hers to sell. The words hung between them, heavy with implication. And in that moment, Donald Riley understood that the locket wasn't just proof of what he'd given. It was proof of what he'd taken. And what had been taken could never be returned. Donald's office felt smaller the next morning, the walls pressing in despite the 30-foot ceilings and panoramic views. He'd barely slept. The image of that locket burned into his retinas every time he closed his eyes. He'd summoned Caleb Monroe, his family attorney, at dawn. I need you to find someone, Donald said, sliding a piece of paper across the desk. Fatima Nicholson. Last known employment, my estate. Approximately 10 years ago. Caleb glanced at the name, then back at Donald. May I ask why? Just find her. It took Caleb less than 4 hours. She's not hard to track, Caleb reported, settling into the chair across from Donald. She worked for you as live-in staff from March 2015 to January 2016. Housekeeping, personal assistant duties. Dismissed. He glanced at his notes. Rather suddenly, actually. No severance documented beyond the standard 2 weeks. Donald's jaw tightened. Why was she dismissed? The records don't say. Eleanor Price signed off on it. Victor Hale arranged transportation. Very clean, very quick. Caleb paused. Almost too clean. The words settled like ash. Donald remembered that time barely. Marianne had filed for divorce in December 2015. The house had been chaos. Staff turnover was high. Eleanor had handled everything. What happened to her after? Donald asked. Struggled, from what I can piece together. Moved between 3 different addresses in 2 years. Worked retail, food service. There's a gap in her employment history starting around late 2016. Donald's stomach turned. A gap. 9 months. The silence that followed was deafening. If you stop here, you'll believe this was a misunderstanding. A regrettable situation, perhaps, but not intentional. But intention doesn't matter when power writes the story. Donald stood abruptly, walking to the window. She never told me. Told you what? Caleb asked carefully, but Donald didn't answer, because the truth was forming in his mind like a photograph developing in chemicals, slowly, inevitably, revealing what had always been there. Fatima had been 24. Quiet, grateful for the job. She'd worked long hours, always accommodating, always available. And he'd been what? Lonely? Entitled? Drunk on the power of having someone in his home who couldn't say no without risking everything, he convinced himself it was mutual, that she'd wanted it too, that the locket was a gift between equals. But there were no equals in that house. Only him and the people he employed. She didn't know, Donald whispered. She couldn't have known when she left. His phone buzzed. Another text from Miriam. Meet me tonight. You need to hear the rest. That evening, Donald arrived at the corner before Miriam. The rain had stopped, but the streets were still slick, reflecting the city lights in fractured patterns. When Miriam appeared, she wasn't alone. Ruth Calder, the church volunteer who'd helped countless women in crisis, stood beside her, a silent guardian. You wanted to know why she didn't come back, Miriam said without preamble. No one ever asked her. No one ever called. Eleanor sent her final check to an address she'd already moved from. Victor never followed up. Donald flinched. I didn't know she was pregnant. Miriam finished. She didn't either. Not until March. By then, she'd already convinced herself that coming back would be worse than staying away. Why? Donald's voice cracked. I would have. Would have what, Mr. Riley? Ruth Calder spoke for the first time, her voice quiet but firm. Helped yourself feel better about what happened in that house. The accusation hung in the air, unanswerable. Miriam stepped forward. She found out she was pregnant 3 months after you had her escorted out. She had $200 in her bank account and an eviction notice on her door. Donald's hands trembled. I didn't know. If I had known. You would have sent lawyers, Miriam interrupted. NDAs. Settlement offers. You would have made it clean. Legal. Erased. The truth of it made him sick. The prayers of the powerless don't ask for justice, Mr. Riley, Miriam said softly. They ask for survival. And survival meant staying away from you. Donald's throat tightened. Why didn't she come back? He asked again, desperate for an answer that would make this hurt less. But some questions don't have comfortable answers. And this was one of them. The three of them stood in a triangle of tension, Donald, Miriam, and Ruth, the city moving around them like they were stones in a stream. She didn't want me growing up owned, Miriam said, her voice steady despite the weight of what she was revealing. That's what she told me when I was old enough to ask. She said men like you don't give. They acquire. Donald recoiled. That's not fair. I would have provided. Provided what? Miriam challenged. Money, a trust fund, a life where every birthday, every achievement, every moment was marked by the reminder that I existed because of your charity, that I was something you fixed instead of someone you created. Ruth placed a hand on Miriam's shoulder, steadying her. She was afraid, Miriam continued, that if she came back, if she told you, you do what powerful men always do. You take control. Lawyers would decide custody. Judges would weigh your resources against her poverty. And I'd end up in your world, raised by nannies and therapists, taught to be grateful for the privilege of bearing your name. Donald's chest constricted, because she wasn't wrong. 10 years ago, that's exactly what he would have done. He would have called it responsibility, protection, doing the right thing. But it would have been control, dressed up as care. She wanted me to have a choice, Miriam said, about who I became, about whether I wanted you in my life at all. Then why come now? Donald asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Miriam's expression softened slightly. Because I'm old enough to choose. The words hit him like a physical blow. Walking away now means you'll never hear the choice she actually makes. And maybe that's easier, not knowing, not facing whatever judgment is about to fall. Donald took a shaky breath. What do you want from me? Miriam looked at him for a long moment, her eyes, Fatima's eyes, searching his face for something he wasn't sure he had. I didn't come to be claimed, she said finally. Donald's brow furrowed. Then why? Because truth doesn't need your acceptance to be valid, Mr. Riley, Miriam said quietly. It just needs to be spoken, and I needed to see if you were brave enough to hear it. The silence that followed was vast and terrible. My mother is dying, Miriam said, and the world tilted again. Stage for cancer. 6 months, maybe less. Donald's legs nearly gave out. Where is she? Mercy General. 4th floor. I need to see her, Donald said urgently. I need to. She doesn't want to see you, Miriam interrupted. She made that clear. I'm here against her wishes. Then why? Donald's voice broke. Why tell me any of this? Miriam reached into her pocket and pulled out the locket again, holding it between them like evidence in a trial. Because she kept this. For 13 years. Through evictions and hunger and nights when she didn't know how we'd survive. She kept it. Miriam's voice wavered for the first time, and I needed to know why. I needed to understand what it meant. She looked up at Donald, and in her eyes he saw not hatred, but something more devastating, expectation. I didn't come for money or apologies or your name in my life, Miriam said. I came to see if you remembered her as a person, or just as a problem you forgot you created. And Donald Riley, billionaire, philanthropist, titan of industry, had no answer that didn't condemn him. Donald didn't sleep for 3 days. He sat in his penthouse with Caleb Monroe, drafting documents, trust funds, medical expense coverage, educational endowments. He had his assistant research the best oncologists in the country. He prepared to fly specialists in from Boston, from Switzerland, from anywhere that offered hope. He was doing what he always did, solving problems with money. On the 4th day, he texted Miriam, I can help. Let me help. Medical bills, treatment, whatever she needs. The response came an hour later. Meet me. Same place. Tonight. Donald arrived with a folder thick with documents, legal agreements, financial proposals, letters of intent. He'd spent 72 hours constructing a framework for redemption, a structure that would prove he was different now, that he'd changed, that he could make this right. Miriam stood under the awning, alone this time. The locket hung around her neck now, visible against her dark hoodie. I can fix this, Donald said immediately, holding out the folder. Full medical coverage, the best oncologists, experimental treatments, a place to live near the hospital. Whatever she needs, whatever you need, I'll provide it. Miriam didn't take the folder. I'll do anything, Donald pressed, his voice desperate. Name it. College fund, housing, a foundation in her name, anything. That's not how accountability works, Miriam said quietly. Donald's hand lowered slowly. Then how? Tell me how. Miriam looked at him with those eyes that carried her mother's wisdom and her own hard-earned strength. Most people won't stay long enough to hear what she says next. They'll assume she takes the money, that this ends with the transaction. That pain can be purchased away. You listen, Miriam said, and you wait. Wait for what? For her to decide if she wants to see you. For me to decide if I want your name in my life. For time to pass without you trying to control it. She paused. Accountability isn't a contract, Mr. Riley. It's a posture, and you don't get to determine when you've held it long enough. Donald's chest tightened. She's dying. We don't have time to. To what? To make you feel better about what happened. Miriam's voice remained steady, but there was steel beneath it. This isn't about your timeline. It never was. The folder felt heavy in Donald's hands. All his solutions, his structures, his carefully calculated redemption useless. I want to see her, he said quietly. I need to tell her. She knows, Miriam interrupted. She's always known. What happened? What you didn't do. What you didn't even remember until I showed up. Some seeds grow in silence, Mr. Riley, she continued, and some truths arrive not to be fixed, but to see who is willing to sit with the discomfort of what they've created. Donald's hands trembled. What do you want me to do? I want you to understand that this isn't yours to solve. Miriam took a step closer. My mother spent 13 years building a life from nothing. She worked 3 jobs. She taught me to read, using library books. She made me believe I was worthy of more than the circumstances of my birth. Tears formed in Donald's eyes. She did that without you, Miriam said. Without your money, without your name, without your permission. And that is what the locket represents. Not your guilt, her strength. The silence that followed was profound. Can I at least? Donald started. You can wait, Miriam said firmly. You can hold space for the possibility that she might want to see you before the end. Or she might not. Either way, you don't get to decide. Donald nodded slowly, understanding blooming like pain in his chest. And me, he asked. Do I get to know you? Miriam studied him for a long moment. Maybe. When I'm ready. When I choose. Not because biology demands it or money enables it, but because I decide you've earned it. She turned to leave, then paused. My mother kept that locket because it was the only beautiful thing anyone ever gave her, Miriam said softly. But she also kept it as evidence. Proof that she existed to you as more than invisible hands that cleaned your house, even if only for one night. Some truths don't arrive to be fixed, Mr. Riley. They arrive to see who is willing to listen. With that, Miriam Nicholson walked away, leaving Donald Riley standing alone with his folder of solutions that solved nothing, his wealth that couldn't purchase time or forgiveness, and the devastating understanding that some debts can never be repaid, only acknowledged. The rain began again, soft and steady, washing the streets clean while leaving everything that mattered untouched. And for the first time in his life, Donald Riley stood in it without seeking shelter, letting it fall on him like baptism or judgment. He wasn't sure which, and perhaps that was the point. The locket had spoken. Now all he could do was listen, and wait, and hope that waiting, for once, would be enough.